Hey, my gorgeous queens. Welcome back. A wife writes 12 letters to her husband while she is away, and when she finally returns home, she discovers he never read a single one because he was too busy making a family with her best friend. Let's go. When I returned to the capital, the snow was falling hard. Yet two freshly cut red silk lanterns hung before the gates of the general's residence. I stood at the foot of the steps and stared at them for a moment. Strangely enough, I almost laughed. 2 years ago, when I left, Pei Dingchuan had fastened my cloak with his own hands and promised that when I returned from accompanying grandmother in her devotions at Ling Mountain Temple, he would be waiting outside the city gates to welcome me home. There had been no one at the gates today, but his residence was already dressed for celebration. Qingdai held an umbrella over me and asked softly, "My lady, shall I send someone in to announce your arrival?" No need. Why should I announce myself at the door of my own home? It was not until I entered the main hall that I learnt who those red lanterns were meant for. Liu Jixue sat beside the heated couch, wrapped in a snow-white fox fur cloak. Me steps stopped. That cloak was mine. In the 3rd year of our marriage, Pei Dingchuan had returned from the northern frontier with 2 flawless white fox pelts. The finest tailor in the household had worked 7 days and nights to finish the cloak. Pei Dingchuan himself had draped it over my shoulders and told me no woman in the capital could wear it better. Now it was wrapped around the woman who had once been my dearest friend. Liu Jixue saw me too. Her hand moved instinctively to the swell of her belly. That one small gesture told me everything. Something thin and sharp seemed to prick beneath my ribs. It was not a great pain. It was worse in another way, fine and relentless, enough to turn my stomach. Ling Yi, Pei Dingchuan rose from beside her. 2 years had changed little about him. His back was still straight, his features still keen, yet the surprise in his eyes vanished almost at once, replaced by the calm certainty of a man who believed he had done nothing truly wrong. There was even a trace of pleasure there. "Why have you only returned today?" Then, as though remembering something, he glanced at Liu Jixue's rounded belly and his voice softened. "Your timing is good. Jixue is with child." The room went silent. A coal cracked in the brazier. I looked at him. Perhaps when the thing you dread finally stands before your eyes, rage does not always come first. Instead, I remembered the 12 letters I had sent him from Ling Mountain Temple over the past 2 years. He had sent replies to the first 3. After the 4th, not a single word, at the time. I had found every excuse for him. The Northwestern Army kept him busy. Court obligations demanded his time. He had only recently returned to the capital and had yet to secure his footing. Looking back, I realized that when a person is determined to deceive herself, excuses grow as easily as weeds. Pei Dingchuan's brow gradually tightened when I said nothing. "Ling Yi, I know this is difficult for you to accept, but Mother has long wished for the PI bloodline to continue. You were gone for 2 years, and Jixue stayed here, helping you tend the household. She and I," he paused. Perhaps it was simply fate. I nearly laughed aloud. Fate, what a lovely word. She had lived in my courtyard on my dowry, worn my fox fur, and shared my husband's bed. And in his mouth, all of it became one weightless little word. Fate. Liu Jixue's eyes had already reddened. Supporting her belly, she rose, her voice as gentle as ever. "Sister Ling Yi, please do not blame the general. This is all my fault. If only you will stay, I need no title at all." At last, I looked at her. "Truly," she seemed startled by the question. "Of course, good." I drew a folded sheet of paper from my sleeve and slapped it onto the table. "Because from this day forward, whatever title you want has nothing to do with me." Pei Dingchuan's expression finally changed. He looked down at the 3 characters written across the page. A deed of separation. The long journey through the winter wind had left my fingers stiff with cold, yet when I placed them on the deed, they were astonishingly steady. My dowry inventory, shop deeds, and land deeds have all been accounted for. Everything I brought into the PI household 2 years ago will leave with me down to the last item. I will not take a single copper that belongs to the Pei family. You want Liu Jixue, I shall make way for you. Sign it." Pei Dingchuan stared at me for a long moment, then gave a cold laugh. You think waving a separation deed in my face will make me bow to you? I said nothing. My silence seemed to anger him more. He snatched up the wolf hairbrush, barely glanced at the terms, and signed his name at the bottom. The stroke was so heavy, it nearly tore through the paper. Shen Lingyi, you are the one choosing to leave today. Do not come crawling back to me later. I looked at his name on the page. The stone that had pressed on my heart for 2 years seemed, at last, to lift. Do not worry. I reached for the deed. That day will never come. Hurried footsteps suddenly sounded outside. Stop. Old Madame Pei's voice had gone shrill with alarm. She had not even stopped to take her hand warmer, supported by her senior maid. She hurried into the hall and saw the deed in my hand at once. Dingchuan, you signed it. Pei Dingchuan frowned. Mother, it is only a separation deed. Once she has finished making her scene, naturally she will. Fool. Old Madame Pei brought her prayer beads down hard on the table. The entire hall fell silent. She stared at her son, every trace of color gone from her face. Do you know why Lingyi did not return to the capital for these 2 years? Only then did Pei Dingchuan sense that something was wrong. Was she not accompanying old Madame Shen in worship at Ling Mountain Temple? Old Madame Pei closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were cold. She never told you. She has returned under a writ from the censorate. The Shen family must submit all the old grain contracts from 2 years ago, when they advanced provisions to the Northwestern Army for official examination. And those transfer documents from the Ministry of Revenue that you stamped with your own seal half a year ago, she paused. They are part of the very same case. I watched the last trace of Pei Dingchuan's indifference slowly vanish from his face. He stared at his mother for a long while. What case? Old Madame Pei gripped the edge of the table. In the 17th year of Chengping, heavy snow blocked the northwestern grain roads. The imperial stores arrived more than a month late. The army was on the verge of running out of food when 3 grain houses under the Shen family received an urgent order from the Ministry of War and moved grain from Hedong and Longyu before the court could send its own supplies. Of course I remembered. Pei Dingchuan had only been a deputy general on the northwestern frontier. Then, in one of his letters, he had written that the most terrible enemy in camp was not the opposing army, but an empty granary. I had taken that letter to grandmother. The very next day, Shen grain carts departed from 3 prefectures at once. That grain did not merely save Pei Dingchuan, it fed thousands of soldiers. But Pei Dingchuan never knew. Or rather, he had never bothered to ask. He only knew that imperial grain eventually arrived and assumed the rest had somehow taken care of itself. Old Madame P continued, the silver and grain advanced by the Shen family should have been reimbursed by the Ministry of Revenue, but something went wrong when the accounts were settled. One sum would not balance at the time. Liu Wenqian served in the ministry's accounts office and happened to handle those very vouchers. Liu Jixua's expression changed, only for an instant. Had I not been watching her, I might have missed it. Pei Dingchuan did. He always did. On the battlefield. He could tell the angle of an arrow's fletching from 100 paces away. At home he could not see guilt shining plainly in a woman's eyes. It is nothing but an old account, he said heavily. What has that to do with me? At last, the corner of my mouth lifted. Half a year ago, did you sign 3 supplementary documents concerning the army grain accounts? His head snapped toward me. In that instant, I had my answer. Liu Jixue hurried to explain. The general was burdened with official duties. My father had those papers delivered and said they merely completed missing formalities from years ago. I did not ask you. I cut her off. Her lips went pale. Pei Dingchuan's face darkened as well. I signed them, he said, looking at me, but they were routine supplements. Who told you that? He fell silent. I answered for him. Lord Liu. A muscle jumped between his brows. Old Madame Pei closed her eyes, as though she could no longer bear to look at her own son. And suddenly I found the whole thing tiresome. Once I had waited for the day, Pei Chuan would finally see what lay beneath Liu Zhi's sweetness. No, that day had come, and all I felt was weary. Qingdai, here, my lady, to the east wing. I turned and walked away. Pei Chuan followed 2 steps without thinking. Where are you going? I looked back, moving out. For a moment, genuine disbelief crossed his face. It was almost absurd, as though the deed I had just placed before him were merely part of a performance. By this point, I was supposed to weep, make a scene, and wait for him to offer me some scrap of dignity so I could stay. Unfortunately for him, I did none of those things. The east wing was already filled with trunks and chests. Qingdai and the Shen steward checked every page of my dowry register. When I married, grandmother had given me 6 shops, 2 estates, a country residence beyond the city, and a collection of jewelry, paintings, and calligraphy. Over the years, however, the silver I had poured into the general's residence far exceeded that dowry. When Pei Chuan was away commanding troops, the household still had favors to return and relationships to maintain. After he rose in rank, he gained more retainers, more invitations, and a freer hand with rewards. He never asked where the money came from. I never told him. Back then, I thought there was little point in a husband and wife counting every coin between them. Looking back, I had spoiled him into a very comfortable sort of foolishness. He seemed to believe silver grew from the soil, accounts balanced themselves, and every mess quietly disappeared before morning. The person making it disappear had always been me. The deeds to all 6 shops are here, Steward Shen said quietly. The leases for the 2 estates have also been registered again. As for the household expenses you covered for the Pei family over the years, we have followed your instructions and will not seek repayment. Do not pursue them. I turned a page in the ledger. Consider it the price of a lesson. Qingdai lowered her head, but a laugh escaped her anyway. Pei Chuan stood in the doorway, his expression growing darker by the breath. Shen Lingyi, must you truly be this ruthless? I looked up. Ruthless. You signed the separation. The shops are mine. The estates are mine. The dowry is mine. I am taking back only what belongs to me. How is that ruthless? For a moment, he had no answer. Then, as if finally finding one point from which he could claim himself wronged, he said, The Pei family has not treated you badly all these years. I nodded. True, which is why I have not laid out, item by item, the tavern debts I paid for you, the gifts I sent on your behalf, or the silver I spent repairing this residence. His face stiffened. I closed the ledger. Pei Chuan, we were husband and wife once. I am leaving you some dignity. You would do well to leave yourself a little too. At some point, Liu Zhi had followed him there. She stood by the door, pale, fingers twisted tightly in her sleeve. Sister, did you already know the Ministry of Revenue would investigate the old accounts? Is that why you deliberately forced the general to sign the separation deed today? As expected, Pei Chuan's eyes shifted. I looked at her and almost admired the effort. Even now, she still knew how to fling mud in my direction. No wonder she had managed to settle herself inside the general's residence right beneath my nose. Liu Zhi. I used her full name first. A month before returning to the capital, I wrote to Pei Chuan and told him I was coming back to settle the old accounts. Second, I wrote the separation deed. He signed his own name third. I paused and looked at her. As for those 3 supplementary documents, you should know better than anyone who persuaded him to put his seal on them. Her face went completely white. Pei Chuan spun toward her. Zhi, General. Her voice trembled. I had no interest in hearing the rest. I picked up the separation deed, now marked with both our private seals, and handed it to Steward Shen. Take it to the prefectural office for filing. Pei Chuan stepped forward. Wait. I looked at his outstretched hand. What is it? He froze for a moment. The confidence with which he had signed the deed was gone. The old case has not been settled. If you withdraw the Shen grain contracts now, and the ministry truly investigates, then the court will be investigating its accounts. General Pi, do not mistake the matter. From today onward, I simply refuse to stand between you and your own reckoning. Outside, the wind rose, driving grains of snow against the paper windows for one moment. He looked at me as though I were a stranger. And suddenly I realized I saw him the same way. 2 years was a long time after all. Long enough to see a person clearly. That same afternoon, after the separation deed was filed, officials from the censorate arrived at the general's residence. They were not bailiffs come to seize the estate. No blades were drawn. No one was dragged away. 2 assistant censors simply arrived with audit orders from the Ministry of Revenue. They sealed several old account books relating to Northwestern Army grain and ordered Pi Dingchuan to appear before the censorate 3 days later to give an explanation. That frightened him more than shouting guards ever could. Those few thin sheets of paper meant the matter was no longer a quarrel inside a household. It was an official case. I stood beneath the covered walkway and watched the officials carry away the ledgers. Pei Dingchuan never took his eyes off me. Only after the men had gone did he speak. You arranged this long ago. It was not a question. It was an accusation. I turned to him. Did I arrange for the Ministry of Revenue to lose a sum of silver and grain 2 years ago? Did I arrange for Lu Wenqian to handle the settlement? Or did I arrange for you to close your eyes and stamp those supplementary records half a year ago? His jaw tightened. I knew that expression well. Whenever a campaign went badly, or someone at court submitted a memorial against him, he would clench his teeth like this and say nothing. Once, I would always have found him a way down from the ledge. I no longer wished to. When Liu Jixue emerged from the room, her eyes were red from crying. General, my father would never harm you. For once, Pei Dingchuan did not immediately comfort her. He asked only, "Those 3 documents, who told you to bring them into my study?" Her lips trembled. Father had someone deliver them, but he said they were only to restore missing grain route records from that year. You looked at them yourself. I only turned to the last page. Pei Dingchuan's voice was grim. Because you told me your father had already checked everything. At last, Liu Jixue fell silent. Standing beside them, I suddenly found the scene bitterly amusing. Once I had sat with Pi Dingchuan in his study until deep into the night, a thick volume of military supply accounts spread between us. I had told him that papers delivered by familiar hands deserved more scrutiny, not less. He said I worried too much. Later, Liu Jixue entered carrying a bowl of sweet soup and said that Lord Liu had served in the Ministry of Revenue for years. How could he possibly make a mistake over such a trivial matter? Pei Dingchuan had smiled. Jixue understands when rules should bend. That night, I stood outside the study holding a freshly recopied list of the army grain accounts. I never even carried the final page through the door. Looking back, the moment that truly chills a heart is rarely the moment someone gives you a brutal shove. It is the moment you stand outside a closed door and suddenly understand that no matter how long you knock, no one inside intends to open it. My lady. Qingdai came toward me. The carriage is ready. I nodded. The Shen family's trunks had already been loaded for the last time. I looked over the residence where I had lived for 5 years. The plum tree beneath the gallery had been planted in the 2nd year of my marriage. Pei Dingchuan had laughed then and said a northern plum might not survive here. It did. Every year I cut the first flowering branch and placed it in his study. The tree had bloomed again this year. It simply had nothing to do with me anymore. I stepped down from the threshold. Behind me came Pei Dingchuan's voice. Ling Yai. I stopped. It was perhaps the first time that day he had called me by my given name rather than my full name. I did not turn around. Those letters you sent back 2 years ago. My fingers curled slightly. What about them? He was silent for a long time. What did you write in them? At last, I turned. Snowlight washed across his face. For the first time, there was something almost panicked in his expression. I smiled. You do not know. He did not answer. Then I understood 12 letters. He had never truly read a single one. Even the replies to the first 3 had most likely been dictated to some secretary and forgotten. I had thought the realization would make me furious. It did not. Instead, our 5-year marriage suddenly seemed like a lamp burned down to its end. The oil had dried long ago. Yet I had sat beside it, blaming the wind for being too strong and the night for being too long. Only now did I understand that the wick itself had already gone dark. In the first letter, I told you grandmother's health was failing and that I would remain at Ling Mountain Temple longer than planned. In the fourth, I warned you that the Ministry of Revenue was reconstructing old Northwestern accounts and told you not to place your seal on any document whose origin you had not verified. In the seventh, I told you pages were missing from the ledgers Lu Wenqin handled that year. In the ninth, I urged you to recheck the army's private advances and borrowed supplies from the past 3 years. And in the last letter, I paused. Pei Dingchuan stared at me. What did you write? The date I would return to the capital. The wind swept through the courtyard. The colour drained from his face. Little by little, suddenly, I felt exhausted. Pei Dingchuan, it is not true that you had no chance. I gave you 12. Then I turned and stepped into the carriage. Before the curtain fell, I heard him call my name behind me. This time I did not stop. The old Shen residence was far quieter than the general's residence. Grandmother had died half a year earlier, and the courtyard had stood empty ever since. I pushed open the main room where she had once lived. The incense burner had long gone cold, but on the writing desk still lay the last ledger she had examined. Before she died, grandmother had held my hand and said only one thing. Lingyi, you may help a person for a season. You cannot live his life for him. I had known she meant Pei Dingchuan. I had not expected her words to prove true so soon. I sat at her desk and laid down the last private account book I had brought from the general's residence. Qingdai opened a wooden box and took out copies of all 12 letters. They are all here, my lady. I opened the fourth at random. The handwriting was still mine from 2 years ago. The Ministry of Revenue has recently begun restoring the old Northwestern archives. If anyone brings you supplementary records for your seal, compare them against the original grain contracts. Do not trust a document merely because it comes through a familiar hand. I read it for a moment, then put it back. Send a copy to the censorate tomorrow. Qingdai stared. My lady, that was a private letter to General Pi. Not anymore. I lowered my eyes. Now it is evidence. 3 days later, I went to the censorate. I did not storm into court or march beneath the Golden Hall. The Great Zhao might be an enlightened realm, but it still had no custom of allowing a noblewoman whose marriage had been dissolved to stand among 100 officials and trade accusations before the throne. I was questioned in a side chamber. The inquiry was led by Lord Zhou, a deputy censor, with 2 officials from the Ministry of Revenue present. 3 sets of documents lay on the table: the Shen family's original contracts for the grain advanced to the army, the receiving ledgers from granaries along the route, and the 3 transfer records Pei Dingchuan had signed later. Lord Zhou pushed one toward me. Lady Shen, do you recognize this seal? I glanced down. It is Pei Dingchuan's private military seal. This document states that in the 17th year of Chengping, the Northwestern Army itself settled the grain advanced by the Shen family, leaving no debt for the Ministry of Revenue to repay. If this record is valid, then the 200,000 taels worth of grain and silver claimed by the Shen family 2 years ago would amount to a second claim on the same debt. I nodded. Which is why this document is false. One of the ministry officials looked up. On what grounds? I took a thin booklet from the wooden case beside me. Because the true army receipts received by the Shen family are here. The grain entered camp by 6 separate routes. Each route bears the signatures and seals of 3 parties: the army quartermaster, the grain merchant who escorted the shipment, and the local courier station. The dates on all 6 original receipts fall a full 11 days after the date on this supposed settlement record. Silence filled the chamber. I continued. In other words, this document claims the debt had already been settled while the final grain shipment was still on the road. Lord Zhou's gaze sharpened. Anything else? Yes. I spread another sheet on the table. The 3 vouchers Lu Wenchen later inserted into the ministry archives were all stamped with the same vermilion paste, but when the Shen grain houses signed documents in the northwest that year, the army had no vermilion to spare. The courier stations issued an ochre red seal paste instead. The ministry official took the pages and examined them closely. His expression changed. The colors are indeed different. Not merely the colors. I raised a hand. Lu Wenqian believed that because a fire once damaged the ministry's old archives and destroyed the original registers, no one would be able to trace the matter. But the Shen family deals in grain, from the moment a shipment leaves a warehouse until it enters an army granary. It passes through many hands. Our records are often more detailed than the courts. He thought he needed to alter one sheet of paper. A shipment of grain leaves dozens behind. Grandmother had taught me that. An account is not merely a number. An account is the road people walked. Forging one record is easy. Erasing every footprint along the road is not. The questioning lasted 2 hours. By the time I stepped out of the censorate, the sky had turned grey. I had barely descended the stone steps when I saw Pei Dingchuan standing across the street. He wore no court robes, only a dark cloak. 3 days had passed, and bruised shadows now lay clearly beneath his eyes. Ling Yi. He strode toward me. Qingdai immediately stepped between us. He stopped. In the general's residence, no one would ever have dared block his path. No, a maid stood between us. And he did not even lose his temper. I only want to ask one thing. I looked at him. Ask. Those documents, his throat moved. If they are proven false, what will happen to me? I do not know. You truly do not. The censorate judges the case. It does not take orders from me. He stared as though trying to decide whether I was telling the truth. I almost laughed. Pei Dingchuan, do you still believe I did all this merely to force you to turn back to me? His face stiffened. That told me I had guessed correctly. You think far too highly of yourself. I walked past him. Then he spoke again. Lu Jixue confessed. I stopped. Confessed what? Her father told her 2 years ago to keep watch for the Shen family's old contracts. The wind tugged at his cloak. His voice was low. The first time she came to the residence, it was not by chance. Something in my chest sank. I had suspected as much, yet hearing it aloud was still like a thumb pressed against an old bruise. I had been the one to bring Lu Jixue into the general's residence. Back then, she told me that after her father fell into disgrace, their relatives avoided her and she had nowhere to stay. She begged me for shelter. She cried so bitterly that I gave her the small courtyard on the eastern side. Later, when I left for Ling Mountain Temple, she wrote to me and promised she would look after the household in my absence. I had even written back one sentence. With you there I can rest easy. There are some words a person should never say too confidently. Life has a habit of keeping such words until the day they can be thrown back in your face. If I had known she came for the old contracts, I never would have what? I lifted my eyes to his. Never let her live in my courtyard. Never let her wear my clothes. Or never take her into your bed. All the colour vanished from his face. That is not what I meant. Then what did you mean? I had rarely pressed him like this, especially after we married. Pei Dingchuan had a hard temper, and I had always thought there was little sense in husband and wife fighting to prove who had won. But if you retreat for long enough, the other person begins to believe you were born without a temper at all. It is true that she approached you with another purpose. But betraying me was still a choice you made yourself. Do not confuse the two. His mouth opened. Not a single word came out, looking at him. I felt the dull ache in my chest slowly begin to fade. Once my greatest fear had been that he truly loved Lu Jixue. Later I understood there was an uglier answer. Whether he loved her or not did not matter. What mattered was that he chose betrayal. Pei Dingchuan. Do not dress yourself up as the victim. Lu Jixue deceived you, but she did not put a blade to your throat and force you to wrong me. Then I climbed into my carriage. The carriage had gone a long way before I lifted the curtain and looked back. He was still standing outside the censorate, snow settled on his shoulders. From a distance, it looked as though half his hair had turned white overnight. Once the old case was opened in earnest, matters moved faster than I had expected. The Ministry of Revenue unearthed several copies of the supplementary records Lu Wenqian had filed years ago. They also found a former clerk who had handled the accounts. The man had already retired to the countryside. When he heard the censorate was investigating, He came forward of his own accord and gave a statement. Liu Wenqian had indeed withheld part of the reimbursement owed to the Shen family for the army grain. Later, a fire damaged the ministry's old archives and destroyed much of the original record. He had planned to use the reconstruction of those files to shift the missing sum onto the Northwestern Army's accounts. But to make the false account stand, he needed someone on the Army's side to acknowledge that the debt had already been settled privately. By then, Pei Dingchuan had risen to the rank of general of the Far Marches. His private seal was precisely what Liu Wenqian needed. That was when Liu Jixue began carrying those so-called routine documents into his study, one after another. Pei Dingchuan found the paperwork tedious. Liu Jixue told him her father had already checked everything, so he signed, simple as pushing open a door. Only when he found a cliff on the other side did he finally think to ask who had built the doorway. The censorate temporarily confiscated his military seal and suspended him from duty pending investigation that afternoon. He came to the Shen residence. When the gatekeeper announced him, "I was studying the new season's grain prices. I will not see him." I did not even lift my head. A little while later, the gatekeeper returned. "General Pei says he only wishes to give you one thing." "What? Letters?" My brush stopped. When I reached the front courtyard, Pei Dingchuan stood beneath the eaves with an old wooden box in his arms. I recognized it. It had once sat on the lowest shelf in the study at the general's residence. Every letter I had written to him was inside. 12 in all, not one missing. Most of the seals had grown dry and brittle with age, but from the 4th letter onward, the envelopes looked as though they had only just been opened. I understood at once. "You read them today?" He did not deny it. "I read them all." His voice was hoarse. I looked at him. "Congratulations. At least you still know your letters." Behind me, Qingdai made a strangled sound and barely managed to swallow her laugh. Pei Dingchuan did not grow angry. He lowered his head and took one letter from the box. "In the 7th, you wrote that pages were missing from Liu Wenqian's old account books. In the 9th, you told me to investigate the army's private advances from the past 3 years. In the 11th, you said that if I received any document meant to reconstruct the old accounts, I was to send it to the Ministry of War for verification before placing my seal on it." With every sentence, his face grew worse. At last, he gripped the letter so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Why did you not send someone to tell me in person?" I nearly laughed from sheer fury. Pei Dingchuan. How had I never realized before that this man could utter absurdities with such magnificent conviction? I know what you were doing then, you know." I glanced at the wooden box. When the first 3 letters arrived, you were still with the army. By the 4th, you had returned to the capital. On the day the 5th arrived, you took Liu Jixue outside the city to inspect a residence for her. On the day the 8th arrived, you bought her an entire set of furnishings. And when my last letter reached your house, you were having my fox fur cloak altered to fit her. His face went utterly white. "You knew all of that," I learnt later. That perhaps finally struck where it hurt. Pei Dingchuan's eyes slowly reddened. "Lingyi, I was wrong. 5 years of marriage. It was the first time he had ever spoken those words so plainly. I had imagined hearing them would feel satisfying. It did not. It only felt late, far too late. I used to think you were too cautious about everything," he said quietly. "I fought for every scrap of merit in the army. Then I returned to the capital and found that the household accounts, social obligations, clan affairs, all of it seemed to depend on your arrangements. I knew you meant well, but sometimes," he stopped for a long while, "sometimes I felt as though I could never measure up to you." I looked at him. That was the first honest thing I had heard from him in a very long time. And when Liu Jixue appeared, you felt relieved. He nodded. "She never contradicted me." I finished the thought for him. "If you said there was a pit to the east, I would tell you to go around it. If she said there were flowers to the east, then even with a pit beneath them, you preferred to think she understood you." His eyes reddened further. I laughed softly. "Pei Dingchuan, you did not love being understood by her. You loved having someone tell you that you were always right." This time he did not argue. The courtyard was quiet. Meltwater dripped from the corners of the eaves, one drop at a time. He suddenly took a step toward me. If the old case is settled, Lingyi, could we ever? Number I answered too quickly for him to finish. He went still, as though pinned in place. You will not even think about it. I already did. I met his eyes. For all 7 days of the journey back from Ling Mountain Temple. I wondered whether, if I came home and found you ashamed, if I heard your explanation, I might give you one more chance. Then I walked through the door and saw Liu Jixue wearing my fox fur. And suddenly, I did not want to anymore. His lips trembled, I continued. You regret this now, not because you have finally discovered how precious I was. You regret it because you have suddenly realized that from this day forward, no one will clean up after you. No one will check your accounts. No one will quietly cover your shortages. No one will smooth every difficult obligation and social debt. No one will stand before the world after you make a mistake and say, Pei Dingchuan was merely careless this once. You did not lose a wife. You lost the woman who spent 5 years catching every burden you let fall. The last spark of hope in his eyes went out. I reached into my sleeve and took out an old jade clasp. He had given it to me with his own hands when we married. I placed it in the wooden box. Take this back as well. Pei Dingchuan did not reach for it. Lingyi, take it. Things from the past only take up room. His hand hovered in the air for a long time before he finally accepted it. In that moment, I saw clearly for the first time what true regret looked like. It was not kneeling, it was not weeping, it was not begging for one more chance. It was the moment a man finally understood that some doors once closed would never again be opened for him from the inside. Half a month later, judgment was handed down in the old case. The evidence proved that Liu Wenqian had embezzled reimbursement funds meant for military grain and forged supplementary vouchers. He was stripped of office, detained pending formal sentencing, and all property tied to the case was seized for restitution. Several clerks and intermediaries involved in the scheme were punished according to their roles. Liu Jixue had not taken part in the original embezzlement, but she had carried documents for her father and concealed evidence. The authorities held her accountable as well, ordering her to remain at the old Liu residence while the remaining matters were investigated. Pei Dingchuan had not stolen military grain, but, as a commanding officer, he had placed his seal on official records without verifying them, and his accounts had been poorly kept for years. He could not escape responsibility for negligence. The court stripped him of his title as General of the Far Marches, reduced him to a minor idle post, and forbade him from commanding troops for 3 years. The day the news spread through the capital, I was at one of the Shen grain houses reviewing a fresh ledger. The shopkeeper kept stealing careful glances at my face. When I finished the final page, I asked, "When will the new grain from Hedong arrive?" He blinked. "The day after tomorrow, most likely. Then clear the southern warehouse." He hurried to agree. Only when I said nothing else did he quietly breathe easier. Qingdai laughed beside me. "I imagine they all thought you would ask for news of the Pei family." "What is there to hear?" I handed her the ledger. "How the court judges them is the court's affair. I still have 3 boatloads of grain to check today." Qingdai laughed harder. "My lady, you sound more like the old madam every day." My fingers paused. At that very moment, a breeze drifted through the window. Suddenly, I missed grandmother terribly. 2 years earlier, when she took me to Ling Mountain Temple, everyone believed she had grown old and wished to devote herself to prayer. Only I knew she had already sensed something wrong with the old reimbursement account for the grain the Shen family had advanced to the northwests. She refused to raise an alarm too early, lest the guilty party scatter the trail. So while we lived at the country residence outside the temple, we quietly followed the 6 grain routes backward, from merchant to courier station to army granary. One paper at a time, one witness at a time. Her body grew weaker, yet her eyes seemed brighter with every answer we uncovered. "Lingyi," she had said to me then, "a daughter of the Shen family need not fear letting others help carry the family business. What she must fear is letting them carry it so long that she forgets she has hands of her own." Now at last I understood. It was not that I had ever lacked hands. I had simply spent too many years holding Pei Dingchuan's ladder steady. I held it for so long that I forgot there were places I wished to climb myself. By early March, the last of the snow in the capital had finally melted. I was traveling outside the city to inspect a newly repaired granary when Qingdai suddenly lifted the carriage curtain. "My lady, up ahead. I think that is Lord Pei." I followed her gaze. Pei Dingchuan stood beside the long roadside pavilion. He no longer wore a general's robes, only a plain blue-green gown. He looked as though he had been waiting a long time. I ordered the carriage to stop, not because I could not bear to leave him, only because some words deserve an ending. I stepped down. The moment he saw me, his eyes brightened. He quickly forced the light away. "I heard you are going to Hedong to inspect the granaries. When will you return? That depends on how smoothly the work goes." He nodded. Suddenly, there was nothing left for us to say. When we were husband and wife, a single meal could stretch half an hour with conversation, army affairs, shop affairs, some ridiculous tale about an official's household, which cat in the residence had stolen fish from the kitchen. Now we stood together in the wind with only silence between us. "Lingyi," at last he spoke. "I did not come today to ask you to return." I looked at him. "I know you will not." He said it very softly. "I only wanted to tell you that when the censorate questioned me, I told them everything I knew. I also turned over the additional documents the Liu family sent afterward. And," he hesitated, "the silver you covered for me over the years, I cannot repay it now." I could not help laughing. I did not stop here to collect a debt. He gave a faint smile too. "I know. That is what makes it worse." Farther down the official road, new grass was already pushing through the earth. He looked at me suddenly. "If I had opened the fourth letter back then, would things have been different?" I considered it. Perhaps the case would have been different. And us. I did not answer at once. He did not press me. After a long while, I said, "I do not know." A small light appeared in his eyes. Then I added, "But life has no back then." The light slowly faded. I felt no triumph. No sense of vengeance fulfilled, only peace. Perhaps this is what it truly means to let a person go. You do not need him ruined. You do not need him to remember you forever. Whatever comes after belongs to him, not to you. I turned toward the carriage. His voice came from behind me. "Lingyi." I paused. "I am sorry. This time, I did not turn around. I know. That was all I knew. I did not forgive him. I did not hate him either." Its wheels rolled over the damp earth where the snow had only just melted, carrying me farther beyond the city. Qingdai sat across from me, held her question for as long as she could, then finally asked, "My lady, are you truly not sad anymore?" I lifted the curtain. Only a thin crust of snow remained beside the road. Beyond it, tender buds had appeared on the willow branches. I thought for a moment. I still am. 5 years is 5 years. "It was not 5 days?" Qingdai said nothing. I smiled. "But sorrow is sorrow. The road still has to be traveled." On this journey to Hedong, I intended to reorganize the Shen family's 3 grain houses. After autumn, I also planned to establish a new reserve granary in the northwest. Grandmother's old ledgers had all been turned to their final page. Mine had only just opened. I leaned against the carriage wall and watched the sky beyond the window slowly grow brighter. Once, I had believed the gates of the general's residence were the boundaries of my whole life. Once I crossed them, I thought I had to guard everything within. Husband, clan, reputation, every last thread of dignity. Only after walking out did I discover the truth. Beyond those gates was not a dead end. There were simply too many roads, so many I could not see where they ended. Spring wind slipped through the carriage curtain, carrying the scent of damp earth and waking grass. Suddenly, I remembered the 2 red silk lanterns hanging before the general's residence on the day I returned to the capital. At the time, I had thought Pei Dingchuan had hung them to celebrate another woman. Only now did I understand. Those lanterns had truly been there to send away my old life. And the spring that belonged to Shen Lingyi had only just begun. The moment that truly wrecked me was when she told him about the 12 letters. Not in anger, just in exhaustion. She had written to him about her grandmother's failing health, about the suspicious grain accounts, about the missing pages in the ledgers. And he replied to the first 3, then never opened another. And when she asked him, "What did you write in them?" he had no answer. He had been so busy basking in Lu Jixue's obedience that he forgot to read the words of the woman who was actually trying to save him. That is the tragedy. She wasn't just his wife, she was his warning system, and he muted her. Okay, welcome to Elena's Cultural Corner. Because today I need to explain something that makes this story hit so much harder. The Hfei Elfei, the deed of separation in Imperial China. Marriage was a legal contract between families, and divorce wasn't something a woman could simply demand. A woman generally couldn't initiate separation on her own unless she could prove extreme circumstances like abandonment, violence, or a husband selling her. But there was one path that respected her agency, Hfei Elfei, or mutual separation. Both parties signed a written document stating they agreed to dissolve the marriage. Once signed and filed with the local government, the woman was legally free, and crucially, she was entitled to take back her entire dowry. The dowry, besties, was not a gift to the husband. It was a woman's private property, registered and sealed, meant to protect her. The laws were actually quite explicit. If a marriage ended through Hfei Elfei, the wife could reclaim every last coin, every shop, every piece of land she'd brought in. That is why Shen Lingyi's ledgers were so significant. She didn't just walk out with her clothes. She walked out with 6 shops, 2 estates, a country residence, and every record of every silver she'd ever spent. She forced Pei Dingchuan to sign that deed, not to punish him, but to legally sever herself from the financial avalanche that was coming for him. She wasn't being petty, she was being precise. For my Western girlies, imagine in Bridgerton that a wife discovers her husband has been hiding another woman in their country house, spending her inheritance on that woman's furniture. Instead of weeping, she goes to her solicitor, draws up a separation agreement, itemizes her entire marriage portion, and makes him sign it before the scandal breaks. Then the Crown investigates his finances, and he realizes she was the only one keeping his books balanced. That is not revenge. That is self-preservation dressed in silk and ink. And the thing that kills me is that Pei Dingchuan didn't understand what he had until the ledgers were already in her carriage. He thought she was leaving him. She was actually leaving his debts, his delusions, and his unread letters behind. She gave him 12 chances, 12, and he didn't read one of them. If you want to review today's cultural tea in a pretty aesthetic layout, all the notes are down in the description box below. And Queens, I have to ask, if you had written 12 letters to someone and they never opened one, what would your 13th letter say? Would you even write one, or would you just silently take back your maps and walk? Tell me in the comments. Love you all so much. See you next time. My ledger keeping, letter writing, front gate deserving queens.